Welcome back on the AM show. Now, I would wager you that in the month of October, you didn't go a day without hearing something about breast cancer. And it's interesting how we seem to forget as soon as the month of October passes. But this morning, let's get a conversation on breast cancer and understand the intersection between lifestyle and genetics when we talk about breast cancer. In the studio with me this morning is Dr. Lily Paimka. She's Senior Lecturer at the Department of Biochemistry, Cell and Molecular Biology, and Deputy Director of Research and Entrepreneurship at West African Genetic Medicine Center. Doc, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
And that's a very rich background and should I call it credentials?
Well, I guess.
And let me add that we're matching yellow and your dress is very lovely. Right. So we're talking about breast cancer. Just to set the tone for the conversation, we know, I like to think that everybody at least has heard about breast cancer, but what really is breast cancer? And then we'll pick it up from there.
Okay. So breast cancer, what happens is cells proliferate normally, right? You start off as a single cell. That is from a sperm cell fertilizing an egg. So you have a single cell that's called a zygote. And for you to arrive as a whole human being, you've had several divisions, which are called mitosis, resulting in a human being that's made up of over 30 trillion cells. And how does that occur? Because cells proliferate. They divide, and you end up as a mass, a human being, right? Now, when this happens, you have genes that regulate how the cells divide so that it's controlled. Because what happens is the DNA, you have the DNA in your cells, right, in your nucleus. When the cell is about to divide, the DNA is copied, and then before the cells split. So you end up with daughter cells that are genetically identical. For instance, you know about DNA fingerprinting, DNA test. If you leave anything on a crime scene like blood, sweat, saliva, whatnot, it comes back to you because the DNA is identical, right, in your cells, right?
Okay.
Now, what happens is cell proliferation or cell division is a normal phenomenon, right, which is tightly controlled. What happens is in cancer is when you have overproliferation, uncontrolled cell proliferation, that leads to a mass, like the cells overproliferating, eventually metastasizing or spreading around the body and eventually killing you. Well, it can happen in almost every cell type you have in your body, like 200 cell types. When it occurs in the breast, that's why you have breast cancer. So there are several ways of identifying or detecting, and one of them is a lump. And typically, that's a mass of cell that has overproliferated that it can actually feel as a lump. And then it keeps growing. So it grows faster than normal cells. Once again, it's unchecked and it overproliferates and then spreads around the body. So that's breast cancer, that occurs in the breast tissue.
Right. You said that genes regulate how the cells divide. And so when that, division is too much or is uncontrolled in the breast, that's when breast cancer develops. Exactly. In simple terms. That's how breast cancer develops.
Cancer. It's a complex genetic trait.
So then what's the intersection between genes and lifestyle?
Okay. So what happens is...
In terms of causes, I mean.
Because of breast cancer. So I guess, should I list the reasons? Okay. The risk factors for breast cancer is, first of all, you have being a woman. Being a woman. And the reason behind that
just being a woman.
Being a woman. Most breast cancer cases are found in women. 99% of breast cancer cases are in women, 1% are in men. And there are several reasons. One, because a woman, you have breast, first of all, you have more breast tissue, like the lobus and the tubules that produce milk are more mature or developed in women. I mean, you look at a man, they typically have flat chest because they don't have a lot of, breast tissue that can
they don't have enough mammary glands.
Exactly, that develop into the cancer. Two, breast cancer is primarily driven by hormones. And I'm talking about progesterone and estrogen. And those are hormones that are highly expressed in women that give rise to our secondary characteristics and everything. So women produce estrogen and progesterone during their cycle. It's involved in so many pathways. Men produce significantly less estrogen. So because it's driven by these hormones, you're more likely to see breast cancer in women. In addition to the fact that they have more breast tissue. So one, that's one of the risk factors. Two is aging. We have about 22 or 20,000 genes in our DNA, right? And they're all involved in different functions. Now, there are a number of genes that regulate how these cells divide, right? Now, what happens is cells have an intrinsic, mechanism to repair DNA breaks and mutations. So, like I mentioned, these cells, you start off at a single cell, which divides so many times to give rise to 30 trillion cells in your body. Imagine your DNA, which is made up of, so the basic unit for DNA is what you call nucleotides. There are 4 types, and they are arranged in different patterns that give instructions to the genes that make the proteins and so on and so forth. Now, in a single cell in humans, the DNA has 6.4 billion of these nucleotides, of the building blocks. Imagine a cell copying this every time before it divides. They are prone to having some mistakes. There are genes that would check for mistakes, genes that repair, and so on and so forth. But as you grow older, right, some of these mutations can accumulate, right? And then eventually what happens is you have a number of different mutations. So it's not just a single mutation. There are a number of mutations that come together. So in these genes, you have the tumor suppressors and the oncogenes, and a combination of these two finally cause the cell to transform and become a cancer cell, right? So as you age, some of these repair mechanisms are a bit compromised, or even as you age, you acquire and accumulate some of the mutations. And when you have the necessary set of mutations in that cell, then you can get breast cancer. That's why it's more of an aging disease in general. But, sorry.
Don't worry.
But what I've described now, the mutations you acquire are what you call somatic mutations. You acquire them in your cells as you grow, right? Now, 90% of breast cancer cases are caused by some of these somatic mutations you acquire, just as a living thing, because you're exposed to many things in the environment, carcinogens, even byproduct of normal cell function, all these things contribute to that, right? Now, 5 to 10% are what you call familial or hereditary breast cancer. In that situation, you've already inherited a mutation from a parent. So you hear about people, oh, she has a BRCA gene or something like that. We all have the BRCA genes. The problem is the mutations in the BRCA genes.
And we can have BRCA1 and BRCA2.
BRCA2.
Yeah.
So that is 2 most popular genes that have been associated with breast cancer. Yeah. And we done what we call high penetrance. So once you have a mutation in those genes, the chances of getting breast cancer are higher.
Let's take it down a notch, so that the young people, I have no doubt that the elder ones, are following the conversation. So you are saying that the risk factors for breast cancer, being a woman, because you have mammary glands, you have cells that are dividing and forming all those, and we have estrogen and what's it called again? Progesterone. Great. And then aging. As you grow, let's say your body doesn't function as well as it used to be, and so ordinarily, cells that would have fought cancers and all those things are not as active as they used to be, and so that also becomes a risk factor.
Yes, so they accumulate. So aging is one. Then 3, smoking is one of them. But smoking is a risk factor for all kinds of cancers. Why? Because the smoke has what you call carcinogens, and carcinogens are compounds that can cause DNA breaks. Now, when you have DNA breaks, or they can also cause mutations in your DNA. And mutations are, changes in the nucleotide. That now changes the function of the protein. So smoking has about 17 known carcinogens. So if you smoke, your chances are increased, your chances of getting. And the other risk factor, having obesity is one of them. Okay. So especially at the postmenopausal stage, women, their adipose tissue or fat tissues also produce estrogen. So that exposure, what happens is with the breast respond to estrogen and progesterone, and that promotes, proliferation and so on. And when there's more proliferation, the chances of having DNA breaks and the chances of having disrepair, wrong nucleotides being inserted and mutations are higher. Right? Now, another risk factor.
Okay, Doc, let's do the proper intersection first, and then we can continue. So the genes, obviously, they play a huge factor. And then you're talking about smoking, aging. In fact, let's add aging to genetics, because that's happening without your control in any way. So smoking is one. because I was asking about where we connect lifestyle and genes, or the scientific bit, ones that we have no control over, and then the ones that we do. So let's do the lifestyle bit.
Okay.
So smoking is one
of them.
And then what else?
Drinking is one of them.
Okay.
So drinking alcohol. So drinking is kind of vague. Alcohol is actually a kind of toxin. And it's something that once it gets into your body, is broken down by enzymes in the liver. Now, one of the intermediates of the alcohol is actually causing, it can affect the way estrogen is metabolized. So it can increase it. It can also form what you call adducts with DNA. It can bind to the DNA, and with that, it can cause extra breaks. So alcohol can actually increase your chances of getting breast cancer. Because
don't smoke, don't drink. Simple as that. Don't drink alcohol, don't smoke, don't smoke anything.
And then a couple of other things that I would say can be modified, but at the end it is down to personal choices.
Yeah. I was going to ask if dietary, diet plays any role at all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, with diet, for example, it boils down to, it translates to having a healthy weight, which also has to do with obesity and all of that. So that can also contribute. So a couple of things that, well, it's up to the individual. Having children can reduce your risk.
Reduce?
Yes. Breastfeeding can reduce. And it boils down back to the estrogen, So what happens is when your breast tissues, right, realize your menstrual cycle, it's cyclical. The exposure to these hormones. During your cycle, right before your cycle, the breasts get bigger.
Yes,
so they're responding to these hormones. There's proliferation, and then it drops. So this cyclical movement can actually contribute to some of these changes that can lead to cancer.
Because it's regulating the division of the cells.
Exactly. So are the estrogen and progesterone. So what happens is the cells that produce the breast milk, the lobules, the cells in the lobules that produce the breast milk, do not reach their full potential. They are still not fully differentiated. Now, they get fully differentiated when you get pregnant. You see, your breast, first of all, you're not exposed to that cyclical change. So the breast cells fully mature in preparation, towards breastfeeding. So when it gets for that 9 months, where you're not exposed to that cyclical change, the cells don't misbehave, in quotes.
Right.
So then the chances of acquiring all those other breaks are limited. So that translates that makes sense to when you breastfeed for a longer period. When you're breastfeeding for a longer period, these breast cells are producing milk.
Does that in any way mean that until you've had a child, your breasts are not fully mature?
Yeah. So they're mature, but not fully mature to the point where they produce breast milk.
Okay.
Yes. So pregnancies, multiple pregnancies, breastfeeding for extended periods kind of reduce your risk, but it's a personal choice. So you can't tell someone, well, have kids. But so this is the thing, breast cancer is what you call a complex genetic trait. So there are so many things that contribute to you developing breast cancer.
So are there genetic tests that women can take, available for women with a family history of breast cancer? And what is the reliability of these tests?
Absolutely. Yeah, there are tests for that. In Ghana, we don't really have...
We don't have genetic tests.
So those who want to take it, the samples get taken out, but there are people developing, some of these tests, like one of this Yamachi Biotech, where I'm part of. But what happens with genetic tests?
Doc, you said that so lightly, but I think it's a very important point that you're making. You're part of the team trying to develop genetic tests for breast cancer. So
not just breast cancer. So the Yamachi Biotech is a cancer research discovery biotech in Ghana. And it's a startup. And one of the things we're interested in is understanding the genetic underpinnings of cancers in general.
Okay.
So ultimately, the plan is to now understand the differences, because it's a genetic disease. It does present racial variations. So, so ultimately, once we get to understand a little bit more about the cancers, we'll probably be able to offer that. But in the meantime, there are a couple of these labs that tend to send the samples out. So let me just describe what genetic testing is. So it's basically testing for maybe a risk for mutations or variations in a known gene. You mentioned family history.
Yeah.
So if you know for a fact that, okay, your parents had breast cancer. So this is a case of Angelina Jolie. right? She found that her mom died of breast cancer at the age of 55, which is considered a little bit low, especially in Caucasians.
Okay.
And so when she tested for the same mutation, it was, I think, one of the BRCA genes. She found out she had the mutation. So you can go to a lab where they take your saliva, or any tissue, essentially saliva, and then they can, like I mentioned, your DNA is identical throughout. But in the tumor, it actually has a lot of mutations. By a regular cell, yeah, you can find mutations that are germline or inherited. So you can go and test and they can let you know. But the thing is, BRCA, of course, is not the only gene that has been involved. There are hundreds of genes that have been implicated. Yeah. Now, the difference here is some of the genes, most of the genetic studies that have been conducted on breast cancer are heavily Eurocentric in white people. Now, human beings evolved in Africa, and you had smaller populations, populate the rest of the world. So the majority of, so let's look at genetics. Not two people are genetically identical, only identical twins. And the only reason is that the same egg, the zygote, split into two people. But beyond that, no one is genetically identical. So looking at that, variation in your DNA, right? Imagine you have a population that, evolved in Africa. It had a smaller one. So the variation or the diversity of the DNA in the rest of the world is not as high as what you find in Africa, because the majority of the population remain there. So we are more genetically diverse. So although most of the studies have been, they're quite relevant, but they're not peculiar to our population, because the majority of the genetic variations, or they call polymorphisms, and all these variations, I'm trying to break it down, in our DNA is higher in the African population.
Okay, Doc, I'm interested in knowing if all this knowledge and research that is going on is actually advancing the treatments for breast cancer.
Absolutely.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Because it's a genetic disease. These days, we are moving towards molecular medicine. Now, to understand and be able to treat a disease, you need to understand the molecular underpinnings. What is happening on the DNA level? Because it's a genetic disease. So if, let's say, you go for sequencing, so this is another thing. I talked about genetic testing. There's something called tumor profiling. So beyond just testing for one gene, you actually take the tumor and profile it. Because I mentioned that the breast cancer is caused by a number of mutations. So when you profile it, it gives you the genes that are driving the cancer. And now there are a lot of molecules and drugs that are being, developed, and so you've heard of precision medicine. They're more precise.
Right.
So this person is overexpressing the HER2 protein, has a mutation, the PTEN, BRCA2. Now there are molecules that actually target. You can target these pathways. So that's where the world is going. Okay. But if you don't understand the genetics, because it becomes difficult. And like I said, breast cancer presents with racial variations. We look different, so it's not surprising that. So if you can't rely solely on data that has been generated in white people, if you look at the reference genome that we use for studies, we realize that there are a lot missing once you sequence black people's DNA.
We should be wrapping up, but and I heard you on the fact that we do not actually have those tests here in Ghana, genetic tests in Ghana. But are there initiatives or, institutions that are championing, if nothing at all, access to information? So healthcare providers understand that this is the way to go in terms of precision medicine, in terms of targeting genes and all that in dealing with breast cancer. And then maybe the information can trickle down to regular citizens like...
Of course, there's a lot going on. I studied breast cancer as a geneticist. We didn't really talk about my research, but in a nutshell, what I'm trying to understand are the germline inherited mutations and the somatic mutations that are driving breast cancer in Ghanaian women. All right. So I work at a number of hospitals, including Kolebu. We collect tumors and saliva, and we sequence them, the DNA, to see what the changes are. And we've actually found some new mutations that are peculiar to black people. And that's supposed to, inform precision medicine, because you can't just copy and paste from white people. And two, so there are a number of people doing research. Emachi is doing a lot of research in sequencing. And you mentioned one of my, the hats I wear as a deputy director for research entrepreneurship at the West African Genetic Medicine Center. The problem in the country or this part of the world is genetic literacy is very low. We don't really know that much about genetics. I mean, we do understand genetics, but we don't do it. There's not a lot of, genetics going on. And so we've established, first of all, the first genetic counseling program in the sub-region. We don't have genetic counseling. The first cohort of students graduated I think in June or July. And we are going to be starting next year masters and PhD medical molecular genetics in Ghana at the West African Genetic Medicine University of Ghana. We've also had this other short courses.
I think I lost you for a second. Did you say genetic counseling?
Yes, is a genetic counseling, yes.
How pivotal is that in the conversation of breast cancer?
It's huge. So you mentioned genetic testing.
Yeah.
When you go, you want to, let's say you suspect you have a familial, or hereditary predisposition to breast cancer. And you see maybe a doctor a genetic counselor.
Yeah.
The genetic counselor will probably propose the kind of test you can do. You get tested and they counsel you. It's beyond, say, it comes and you have a BRCA2 mutation. The genetic counselor is going to counsel you, what your options are, what your risks are, the rest of your family, how you pass it. That's what a genetic counselor does. Okay. So now that this part of the world, we are getting interested in genetics. It's very important to have. So genetic counselors also counsel people who are going to have children, you're pregnant, you're older, the chances of having, children with genetic defects. So those are what they do. But the other,
This will be my last question to you. How do you as an individual envision the role of genetic research evolving and not just here in Ghana or Africa, but the rest of the world, in terms of the fight against breast cancer over the next decade? Do you think the research that we're doing and the data that we're collecting and all that would actually bring us some results?
Absolutely. So we are playing catch up with more advanced countries, right?
Yeah.
They do their tumor profiling. A doctor has this wide array of drugs that you can, access. So when we generate more data, in Black people, we're able to understand the pathophysiology of the cancers, because the mutations influence the development, progression, even treatment. So
you mentioned that we are more diverse mutations here in Africa than the rest of the world.
Because genetically, generally, we are more diverse. Now, when you conduct research, genetic research like that, you're able to even identify therapeutic targets. There's this drug, tamoxifen, etc., that targets some of these, like the estrogen and whatnot. It's administered at Kolebu. They're able to target this thing. So with a peculiar, diversity, we are very likely to identify novel genes, novel mutations that will help us understand the genetic underpinnings. And we have to join the rest of the world in, developing precision medicine. So absolutely, you can't underestimate the importance of genetic research, because that's a blueprint. The way you look is because of your genetics.
Okay.
Yes. So
thank you so much, Dr. Lily. So, just to end this conversation, I'll give the chance to speak to our audience directly if there's something we left out. But are you saying that it's easier to manage breast cancer outside the continent than it is inside?
Absolutely, but not outside the continent is very big. It's big. We've got the other part.
Okay, so Ghana, it's much more difficult to manage breast cancer in Ghana.
Ghana, say, compared to maybe the USA, is absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely. We don't have all the tools, but the doctors are doing a fantastic job.
With you doing so much research, we can only hope that in a few years
we'll have
you will be the solution that we are looking for. I'll give you a minute to, if there's something we've left out, if there's some important information, in fact, how we can even get more information on all this. Just 2 minutes, talk to us.
Okay, so one thing we didn't touch on was breast cancer awareness. So it happens to be one of the issues I'm really passionate about, because I remember when I was preparing my proposal, moving back, I was struck by the disproportionately high mortality rate in Black women, not just Black women, in Africa and in Ghana. And it's partly due to low awareness, partly. Can add it, we have the more aggressive subtype as well. So we established a NUFU festival, the West African Genetic Medicine, with the West African Center for Cell Biology, WAGBIP.
Okay.
And we established the NUFU Fest, and it's been run...
NUFU Fest?
NUFU Fest, yeah. It's been run for the past 7 years, where we raise breast cancer awareness, we educate women, we provide free examination. Also part of Breast Society of Ghana. And we also, do that. So that's one thing I'd like to point out, that early detection saves lives. I talked about how the cells are over-proliferating.
Yeah.
So you need to catch it before it spreads. So it's linked to, the
early
actual
detection.
Exactly. So the early detection saves lives, and that's one thing the WHO, everyone is going to be harping on, because it makes absolute sense that if a cell is over-proliferating and it's a cancer cell, it grows unchecked, you need to seek early care, and then you, of course, better chance of surviving.
I wish we had more time to get into that. I was really enjoying the conversation. Thank you so much. And that is Dr. Lily Paimka. She's Senior Lecturer, Department of Biochemistry, Cell and Molecular Biology, and the Deputy Director for Research and Entrepreneurship at West African Genetic Medicine Center. And we're trying to understand the genetic basis of breast cancer and where the intersection really is in terms of lifestyle and our genes. I hope you've been educated. Thank you so much, Doc, for joining us on the AM show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, there's still a lot coming your way. You don't want to go away. We'll be right back.